The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. You made it. It's Friday. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency for all your equipment financing needs. Go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark, all in studio for the first time in, well, forever on a Friday. You can dial us up, find time if you so choose at 489-1240, 489-1240. Email address chris@hailvarsity.com, and always welcome to check in on the stream with Hail Varsity YouTube. Go there to watch the show along with Hail Varsity Radio Twitter at HVarsity Radio. So we'll spend some time. You had Coach Dvorak talk about the linebacking core, big part of that Husker defense for 2023 as it's in transition system-wise, but plenty of options as Coach talked about that. We'll get into some of these teams that are question marks with the preseason top 25. You've got Phil Steele, you have Athlon, you have the upcoming preseason coaches and top 25 polls that will be out. And who are some teams that, well, some of the national folks are curious about? Do you buy or do you hold off on some teams that looked great last year and you're just unsure of this year? So we'll get there in a little bit. Jacob Padilla will join us. He is tipping off here about an hour ago, coaching hoops. So busy week for Nebraska basketball. Jacob's thoughts there. Bill Doleman going to join us at 5. Brady Oltmans from Hail Varsity. He has done exquisite work with HailVarsity.com on some position breakdowns and previews. A really good story as well, as there's a push to the Senate for NIL. So we'll get covered there with Brady. And then let's talk making some money with VSiN's Danny Burke. Danny Burke back from the bachelor party extravaganza. We left off last night with that. And as always, get your subscription to Hail Varsity Magazine, hailvarsity.com/offer. Do that for the print and for the digital. You'll be a happy Husker fan in 2023. Guys, what's shaking? Ready for a weekend before the roadie to Indy next week. And, camp will be here before we know it. What's new?
I'm ready for fall. I tell you that much. Because I look
Feels not quite like fall, but decent outside.
But then you look at the forecast next week, and this is where it gets you.
It's going to smoke you out. It's going to be hot.
Because you get this. You're getting mid to high. He's like, man, I can get used to this. But it's not even August yet. Late July and August roll around, and it's the February of the summer months. You know how you get to February in the wintertime, and you're like, okay, this whole winter thing was fun while it lasted. I'm ready for spring, and then boom, you get like 8 inches of snow dumped on you in February, and you go, what the hell was that?
February's always good at sprinkling in a couple 70-degree days, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you get to late July, early August in Nebraska, and you get these occasional, the humidity's not too bad. It's only mid-80s. Fall's right around the corner. Oh, don't worry. Those 105-degree days with 90% humidity, they're still coming, just to make sure you know what? I am ready for fall. It's coming.
Yeah, I'm not too thrilled. I looked at the forecast for next week. It's supposed to be 98 the day I move apartments. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be a fun, sweaty, hot adventure throughout the day.
Can I suggest something?
Yes.
Budget and hire movers. I've moved too many times in my life when I was your guys' age. Too many treks up the stairs. No.
Luckily, it's only one flight.
Okay. So
it's
you'll
doable.
be all right. You'll be all right.
Connor can barely pay his bar tab at McKinney's. Think he can pay movers?
Really?
No comment.
Are you, your name's no? They just let you in and out?
They just know who I am. I'm just kidding. But
do they run juice on you?
No. I can actually pay the tab. Don't worry. But I'm not going to hire movers.
Connor, my advice to you
is to keep drinking.
Moving. No. Well, it's similar.
I will probably do that.
A 30-rack Busch, hell of a lot cheaper than movers, and you get your friends over there.
And a couple large pizzas from our friends at Lazarus.
There it is.
Boom.
There it is.
Night made.
That is the bribe. I mean, that is the thank you.
Yes.
The key is just make sure you have everything like boxed up before your friends get there. If you're still in the process of getting everything boxed, it has to be very simple. We're going to pack it up. We're going to put it in the cars, the truck, if you rent out a U-Haul, whatever you do. Take it to the new place. At the new place, that's where you have the beer and the pizza.
Well, it's going to be an adventure, and hopefully we'll have everything boxed up by the end of the weekend. Fingers crossed, but we'll see how it goes.
Let's dive into some linebacker discussion. Guys, scale of 1 to 10. Let's go here first. How do we feel about the linebacker options? And I'm going to jump into the pool first and say I'm going to give him a solid 7.
Damn, took my number.
Okay, you and Elway, I know. But I think 7 out of 10 with a chance to rise up if there's injuries or inconsistency in a new system in a new year. That happens. That happens more often than you think. But I like some of the options. I like some of the names. And from Coach Dvorak's interview with the network, sounds like everybody's been working at the different spots, the Jack, the Will, the Mike, and you want folks to be able to be interchangeable. And you've got some young guys. Mav Noonan's made an impression. You have some guys that have been a part of the program from a versatility standpoint, and Jamari Butler that is athletic enough to stand up, but you can also put him down with his hand in the dirt. And, of course, you've got Reimer and Henrich both back. Henrich trying to recover and kind of resurge from that injury that took away a lot of his fall and all of his spring. So he's been doing the mental ramp thing and helping some of the younger kids, but also he needs to get out on the field and be what he's been. And I think we could see a really good Nick Henrich because he's shown the first and foremost the care, and he's had some good games. And I think the more tackling that Nebraska's been able to do, the more live work, or at least the more reps you get. It's not been what he's accustomed to from a practice standpoint. You're going to be live under Matt Rule. You weren't live that often, if ever, with the Frost era. It's not that they didn't go live, but your contact was more limited compared to what you're going to have under Rule within trying to get your team prepped up for what Saturday is. So Reimer as well. I mean, Reimer's poised to have another 100 tackle season. He missed out last year because he missed 2 games. And if that D-line can keep some of the big guys off of Reimer, I mean, Reimer can keep flying around. He is a difference maker at linebacker, and just a couple of years removed from 114 tackle. I mean, he's poised to break into that 300 tackle club and maybe surpass a guy like Mike Brown from a career tackle standpoint. So we'll start with both those guys, one back from injury, one trying to have an incredible senior season and go out the right way. And
because you said a 7, I'll amend my number and say I'm a 6.5. And one of the things I think you have to talk about when you talk about Reimer as well as Henrich is just a reality of football, and that's injuries. And these are guys that every single year we've seen them on the field, they've had some sort of nagging injury. That's not a fault.
No, they've played through a lot of crap.
I'm saying that's not a fault on them. That's a reality in football that you're going to get banged up. And credit to these guys with Nick and with Luke. These are guys that have played through injuries. They've played through, Reimer on that interception turn against Buffalo.
Hip.
He injured his hip and I believe his shoulder on the same play. Finished the season, then got cleaned up after the season. So these are guys that they have dealt with injuries, they've played through them, but how often can you expect to continue playing through an injury? There's the luck element of football where sometimes someone's going to roll up on you, something's going to happen. And behind those guys, because I think you're going to have more guys pressed into service, those guys both adapt to the new defense, which I think is still a bit of a question mark at this point. Henrich is not a guy that is tailor-made for a 3-3-5 defense. I think Luke Reimer can adapt. He's also not tailor-made for it, but I think he can do fine there. But when I look at those two in combination, neither of them is quite the ideal fit for a 3-3-5. So how are those guys going to be able to adapt? That's one question. I think you're going to need some depth pieces. Who are those guys going to be? I mean, we've had the coaches rave about a guy in Eric Fields. We haven't seen him on the field just yet. How quickly is he going to be ready? As you mentioned, Jamari Butler, another guy we've seen on the field but hasn't quite put it all together during his Nebraska career. Is he going to be able to take another step this fall? That's the question in my mind is, if it's not Reimer and Henrich, which those guys are probably your leaders in the clubhouse right now, who's it going to be that's going to step up to be one of those 3 backers along with, MJ Sherman, I think, is, after the spring game, probably a shoo-in, so that's why I'm just listing 2. But who are those other guys going to be? Isaac Gifford's a guy we've seen on the field. I think he's more fit for a 3-3-5, but you haven't heard all that much about him, so kind of makes some of the alarm bells go off. There's options at that linebacker spot. I just wonder, is Nebraska going to be able to go out there and field a starting 3 that you feel comfortable in?
I absolutely think so. I mean, you get Reimer, you get Henrich, you've got MJ Sherman, you got Chief Borders, both guys with experience, both guys with plenty of SEC pedigree. You can bring Fields along, or if Fields gets it and wows, you play him. I mean, you play the best player. It would have been nice to have old E back, and I know he's off to Michigan, and Ernest Hausman, Gage Stanger making the move from safety to linebacker. And I'm not saying he's a middle, but he's a guy that you can put up there.
And he's a guy who showed some flashes in the spring game. As a guy who looked like he could have it. And obviously, now that he's moving up to linebacker, you think there's probably going to be a season of adjustment where you're trying to put on weight and get ready for the linebacker spot. But if he can be ready sooner rather than later, that's a win for the defense.
Kane Williams, Bama transfer, Connor, is a guy that, and Nebraska did this with Farley and Jamel Williams. They were safeties that they brought up, and they were the outside speed demon guys that were hybrids before hybrids. They were great against the run, and they were incredible off the edge when they'd blitz in. Kane Williams is a guy that, man, you're good enough to get to Bama. You transfer in, and maybe this hybrid linebacker spot from safety to linebacker, another move along with Gabe, or make that Gage Stanger 2 options there to probably either play the Jack or the Will for Nebraska. But the middle linebacker spot, I think they can be okay with, because you're going from that 3-4 where you had 2 inside backers to the 3-3 part of that 3-3-5.
Well, I think a part of it too, and I like that they can make hybrid positions if necessary. And you guys talked about how a lot of guys played through injuries, right? Well, if you know multiple positions within that linebacker group, and I know it's already hard enough to know the schemes about one. I mean, the mantra, do your job, is essentially worldwide in the world of sports. But if you can understand, say if you're a middle linebacker, you can understand the Will and the Sam linebacker duties. I mean, the age-old saying, the best availability is availability, right? So, or best ability, sorry.
Yep,
there it is.
There we go. But it's Friday. But if you can learn and know how to play all 3 linebacker positions, in the case that you need to have a hybrid guy, or somebody goes down, or you need to have somebody go step up, I mean, that's invaluable to a football team, especially in the Big Ten, especially when it's 20 degrees out in November, and you need other guys to step up in a defense that will hopefully be pretty successful in a new scheme.
And that's why I worry about Nick Henrich, and that's what I was kind of getting at with my point of, I don't think he's a linebacker that's tailor-made for the 3-3-5, because we're talking about Gage Stanger and Kane Williams and guys. I mean, Isaac Gifford's another guy that falls into that category, a guy that can use his wheels, be as effective in coverage as he is in the box, stopping the run. He can move sideline to sideline. That's what the 3-3-5 needs. It needs a guy who can flow sideline to sideline, can cover just as well as he can blitz, and whenever he does blitz, he can be fast, aggressive, and can really blitz from anywhere. That's what the 3-3-5 is built upon, and whenever I list those things off, I don't think Henrich is the prototypical guy you think of to be able to do all of that. And could I be wrong here? Could he make the adjustment well? Potentially. He's asked to do something completely different in the last defensive scheme. But that's a guy that I worry about, especially coming off of injury, a little bit behind the 8 ball, picking up this defense. How is he going to adjust to the 3-3-5? And where is he going to find a role on the defense? Because he's not a guy that strikes me as a guy that can play all 3 positions in that linebacking core.
He is body type wise. I mean, he's your meat and potatoes guy in the middle, tracking down, stopping the run between the tackles versus a backside chase down guy. Yep. And, you drop into your coverage, you do your thing, you patrol the middle. But Nebraska's had a long run of middle linebackers with those 2 other outside backers being the speed/hybrid options. And, yeah, you've got big bodies in that A-gap where they're going to keep the guards or the center off of the middle linebacker. I mean, you look at Foreman and Barrett Root and of course, Phil Ellis, John Hess, Mike Anderson. I'm going back, 30 years with that run of middle Carlos Polk, those middle linebacker guys that just their best fit, their best ability was in the middle there because of their body type and just their toughness, and they were fast to get downhill. You mean, and I'm not calling any of these guys current or past Mike Singletary, but you've got a certain body type, and you have to have a certain intelligence level to call out what you need and run that defense in the middle. And I think of whether it's a 3-3-5, a 4-3, a 3-4, you need kind of that big dog, that alpha guy in the middle to be able to handle the downhill run attack that I don't know if we'll see from Wisconsin, but they should. You know what Iowa's going to do. You know what Minnesota's going to do. You know what Illinois is going to do. So that's the task at hand is don't be murdered on first down or third and short in the run game. That's still key to the Big Ten is stopping the run.
And think how different this conversation would feel, not to cry over the dog that ran away, but if Ernest Hausman was still in the middle, he'd fit that role perfectly of being that guy that can flow sideline to sideline, that excelled in coverage just as well as he did stepping up and filling in the box. That's a guy that I think would completely change the tenor of this conversation about the linebackers.
You'd bump it to probably an 8 or a 9.
Yeah, there's still talent in this room, don't get me wrong, but it seems to be the piece that I don't quite see on Nebraska's roster right now. That guy that is really a do-it-all backer that, you know what, taking on a Big Ten linebacker pulling up into the hole, the Big Ten lineman pulling up in the hole, he can handle that, but on 3rd and 8, you can keep him on the field, and he can get out in coverage and get sideline to sideline and be effective there. That's what Nebraska really lacks in that linebacker core right now.
Well, you just don't want that matchup where it's a back or a tight end that's wearing out on 3rd and 7, wearing out your middle linebacker in coverage. We'll get some thoughts. Jacob Padilla's on the way. Thanks for joining us on a Friday. It's Hail Varsity. We're presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for hanging out. Friday edition, Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark. We welcome in Jacob Padilla to talk some hoops at Jacob Padilla _ with HailVarsity.com and magazine. Jacob, how's it going? How was the tip-off early?
It was a 3 o'clock in the afternoon after a 3-hour drive type of game. Couldn't make a jump shot, but found a way to win by 10.
Love it. Some would say you covered, but I don't know what the line was. So good on you, man. Good work. Did you have a good feel that your team was going to hang on by 10, or do you ever put your feet up until the final horn?
Yeah, it wasn't quite. I mean, they got it down to like 6 in the last few minutes or something like that. So it wasn't like we had it put away with 4 minutes to go. But last minute and change wasn't terribly stressful. We just couldn't quite get the separation we needed because they were hitting threes and we weren't.
Well, I get you. That's the flurry of threes, man. Well, you had an interesting week this week for Nebraska basketball, and I know you caught up with Sam Griesel. Let's start there, Jacob, as Sam has inked the deal in Germany, and I know he had some summer league success with Boston. Some thoughts from Sam as he takes the next step.
Yeah, Sam actually signed with the German club before summer league even started, and I had heard about that. I knew that he had a deal lined up overseas, but then he performed well. I mean, he didn't play a ton in the games themselves, but he performed well at the workout with Boston. He said he performed well in their training camp and their practices leading up to the summer league, and did well enough in those settings where it's a little bit more structured, a little bit more under control, as opposed to it's kind of a free-for-all once you get out there and everybody's trying to prove themselves. So it's a little different kind of flow of the game in summer league, and Sam said wasn't the best fit to show his strengths and everything, but he did well enough behind the closed doors to earn an Exhibit 10 contract from Boston, or at least the opportunity to talk about it. And an Exhibit 10 is basically teams give you kind of a nice little chunk of change on the front end to get you to camp, and then from there they either decide they can convert your contract to a two-way contract, which are the kind of hybrid G League or NBA, where you spend time with both those contracts. And there are 3 of those now in the NBA moving forward, where there used to be 2 each team has available, or they can just choose to kind of cut you, and then they would have your G League rights. So you would go and play for their G League team that season, and so the organization can kind of keep developing you under their wing. So those were kind of the options on the table for him: stick with that German contract, or take a shot. And he had to kind of sit down and make that decision, but ultimately decided kind of just the style of play, the opportunities over there in Germany just fit him better than what he probably would have found in the G League. So he's going to go. And for someone like Sam, for people that don't know, like the European teams, those overseas teams, they have a cap on the number of like imported players they can have on a roster because they want to make sure that the players from those countries have a chance to play too. Mm-hmm. With Sam having his dual citizenship, he doesn't count towards that for the German league, the Bundesliga over there. So he's basically like a free, like he's kind of a cheap way for the German team to get an American player on their roster without taking in one of those import spots. So he found a good fit over there, a good program that is losing basically everybody from a really successful year last year. So a lot of opportunity there, and his grandparents are over there, so they'll get a chance to see him play as well for the first time since he was playing AAU in high school.
So, Jacob, what's the long-term situation for Griesel? Is he going to be in Europe for the foreseeable future, or is he going to have more chances to come back and try to earn an NBA contract, an NBA roster spot? Well, what does the future for Sam Griesel look like?
I'm sure like he'll be in the mix for like summer league invitations and things like that moving forward. Obviously, it sounds like the G League path isn't something that he's interested in, so it would probably be more go overseas and kind of see how that goes, see if he develops maybe the jump shot just a little bit more consistent on top of the things he already does well. Come back here and show out in the summer league, and then maybe you can land an NBA contract that way. But it sounds like he's kind of content to. He's kind of had a little bit of the NBA experience. Got to wear a Boston Celtics jersey. Got to see. Got to work out in front of Brad Stevens and all that. So I mean, I think it'll probably be Sam's going to go have a nice career over there in Germany, and depending on how he develops, I'm sure he'll get a few more opportunities, like in summer leagues, moving forward to maybe earn a little bit more than that.
Jacob Padilla is with us on Hail Varsity Radio. Jacob, the non-conference schedule came out for the men this past week, and I'm curious to get your initial thoughts. I know it's super early, but what's kind of a target record in your mind for this team to get through the non-con heading into that 20-game Big Ten gauntlet?
Yeah, I can't say I've really dove deep into the rosters for some of those early non-conference games to know which of these kind of the mid-majors are going to be sneakier than some of the others. But just kind of the general impression, it definitely looks like a schedule lined up to allow a team to kind of build some confidence early, to kind of work in their transfers and their young players to try to build some confidence, and then take on some of those tougher matchups later in the non-conference, leading into the Big Ten, where you've got the Creighton matchup, obviously, and then the Kansas State down in Kansas State. They're at Kansas State this year after the neutral site game last year. So those will be the two toughest ones. Pretty sure they'll be underdogs in both those games if they were to kind of put the odds out right now. And then you kind of look at the rest of them. Oregon State's kind of in a tough spot right now, rebuilding a little bit after that tournament run a couple of years ago. They've got that as the neutral site game up in Sioux Falls, and then it's a lot of low and mid-majors kind of filling out the rest of the conference. So we'll see. There may be one or two kind of tricky ones in there that they're going to have to really earn, but just kind of looking at it, it's like you got a chance to win 8-9 games in a non-conference before you even get to the Big Ten.
Jacob, I'm looking ahead, and the exhibition game this year is going to be against Doane. I always love the exhibition game because you get to see a lot of local high school talent on display taking on the Big Red. And how well do you know that Doane basketball team? Are there any familiar names from the local prep hoop scene that we'd know playing for the Tigers this year?
Brady Tim from UTAN was a really good high school player, and he's their starting point guard, started for them as a freshman, put up almost 20 points a game last year for them. So he's their leading returning scorer coming back. And Josiah Gardner from Crete, who started D2 and transferred there to Doane. He was injured most of last year, I think, but he's back, and he's kind of the interior presence to go with Tim at the point guard spot. So those are kind of two of the main players that I'd anticipate, at least in terms of locals that are coming back for them next year. I know they're either they're done or they're currently over in London, I think, right now on a tour of their own. So that's kind of a cool experience for them, but I haven't really seen kind of what they've done over there.
Jacob, what's the latest with Derek Walker? What are you hearing about his pro prospects?
Yeah, I haven't really seen anything recently. I know he obviously got the All-Star opportunity, got a chance to go out to Portsmouth, play in the PIT out there. But I haven't really heard anything since then. That's probably one that I need to kind of check up on and see what's going on there. But I'm sure that with what he showed this past year, he'll have a chance to find a nice landing spot overseas to kind of keep playing, because I know he was talked to him in season, and that was definitely the plan. Like, he wants to keep playing and see where the game will take him.
Let's talk about Nebraska. They're packing their bags for the end of July, first part of August, the international trip with Coach Hoiberg, second time that he's having a team head out to Spain July 30th in Madrid, then Valencia in Barcelona August 2nd. Your thoughts on just kind of the chemistry this type of trip can create with this team, this roster you see?
Yeah, and just got an email today. We're going to be able to talk to Coach Hoiberg and a player or two on Monday to kind of preview that trip. So good timing there to kind of hear how the summer has gone for them. We haven't heard from them really since Rink Mass and Jamarcus Lawrence and C.J. Wilcher last month. So it'd be good to kind of talk to them, see kind of where they are going into it. I know as far as like the on-court chemistry, it'll be a little tough just because of the guys they've got missing, where obviously Keisei Tominaga and Rink Mass are currently with their national teams. And Blaze Keita and Josiah Alec are both coming off surgeries and injuries and don't yet know what their availability is. So they might have a very small team out there on the court once they get to the Spanish trip and get on the court. But ultimately, the games aren't the most important part of it. It's all about the off-court experience and guys kind of getting to bond outside their comfort zone together, where there's not a lot else to do besides taking the experience with your teammates. Spend a lot of time talking and all that. Obviously, staying together on the road and go seeing the sights together. Kind of nothing to do but spend time with your teammates over there outside of the basketball portion of it. So you will get a little bit. You get a chance to incorporate a guy like Bryce Williams and some of the other guys that are new to the program. Get a chance to kind of let them get out there and kind of show what they can do, test out, kind of see, all right, how does he look running with them running action for him within Nebraska's offense, that type of deal. But ultimately, these experiences are all about kind of what they gain off the court.
Jacob, have you devised a plan to commandeer the company credit card and take yourself a work trip to Spain just yet?
I have not heard. At this point, I'm just hoping that I'll be able to put together a functioning live stream of these games. I know Crane just announced Flow Hoops is going to broadcast their overseas trip. So hopefully Nebraska will be able to work out something similar where Facebook Live, they get a streaming site, whoever it may be, that give us a chance to watch at least most of these games. Where we got to see some of them for the volleyball trip. I'll just take whatever I can get at this point, because I think accompanying them is probably not in the cards, unfortunately.
I hear Valencia is beautiful this time of year.
It's always beautiful. You can get there. Jacob, have a good weekend with your team. Thanks for a few minutes with us.
Yep, thanks, guys.
All right, there he is, Jacob Padilla. He was able to sneak in on the road to a quiet spot and talk some Husker hoops with us. So thanks to Jacob. All right, who is buying or who are you holding on with some of these holdover teams that had a great run, finished pretty high in the top 25 for football season? Some teams in question. We'll get there next on Hail Varsity Radio.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for hanging out. Hail Varsity Radio on a Friday, presented by Currency. Weekend edition tomorrow. 7:45 is when we're going to set the time. over-unders on who is the last man in on that party?
Not me.
Not you. You got to be here. So it's not to be in Cranack. Who's going to be in the chair first?
Well, there was a morning a couple weeks, it was last week, where it was in fact last week. I was just tired as hell. I got to bed too late, and then whenever I woke up, I put my water on the stove to make my coffee in the morning. And while I was putting my contacts in, brushing my teeth, waiting for my water to get hot, I realized I didn't turn the stove on. So I just had cold water, and I had to run over into work and make it through with no coffee. And let me tell you what, don't recommend.
You're all right. You're all right. So we'll see, but catch up with us tomorrow morning on Hail Varsity YouTube channel and the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed, 7:45-ish to 9. Well, I just got to let the folks know. So preseason polls are out in a lot of the magazines. We talked with Phil Steele about a month ago. Athlon has their picks and projections, not just with conference races, but the vaunted top 25. And here are some of the teams that are in question. Do they live up to the hype? Do they follow the momentum? Do they fall off? Those are kind of the choices to make, A, B, C, or D, multiple choice here. So I'm going to list some teams, and we'll go round table on whether they fade or finish where they're supposed to, or do they maybe surprise? USC is leading the list. Clemson is in here. Tennessee, a question mark. TCU is a discussion point. Texas A&M, Kansas State, and to round it out, Iowa. So we have 7 teams. Where do they end up? Question mark about USC is always going to be their defense. That's been a liability when they play teams like Utah. They lost in a shootout to Tulane. And as the Grinch who stole defense get another year? He did. And can that USC defense toughen up and learn how to tackle somebody? They've got phenomenal athletes. They always recruit well. But SC was right there as a top 4 team. They were a playoff team. Riley's been to the playoffs 3 times in his career. So it's never been an issue offensively. They put up enough points to go. Caleb Williams had a bad hammy, bad fingernails, and a worse defense, and they got swept by Utah. Clemson is there. They've got a new OC. They hired away Riley from TCU, and Clemson's had a bunch of 5-star quarterbacks end up there in post-Trevor Lawrence time. They've never delivered. They've also had to go through some coordinator transitions on both sides of the ball. Can Clemson get back to top 10, top 5 versus top 25? Then there's Tennessee. The Vols lose 2,000-yard receivers. They lose Hendon Hooker. And there's question marks about Milton. Tennessee's schedule's not easy. We get to TCU. Is this really Sonny Dykes' kiss to the offense where this is what TCU will be moving forward? A lot of times they struggled on offense. They'll have a good defense back, but again, replacing your top 2 receivers, quarterback, and that magic that was 1-score wins a season ago. Texas A&M, ATM's how I always write them down. And you look at that coexistence of Jimbo and Bobby. It sounds like a great late Friday night movie, but it's now the reality in the coaching rooms with Jimbo Fisher, who's always been an offensive guy. Let's bring in Mr. Harley and see if this offense can actually match what we've recruited to. They've had incredible recruiting classes. The COVID year, they finished top 5. K-State, all Kleinman's done is win 8 to 10 games in his first 3 years. Their quarterback returns. Then there's Iowa. Baby Ferentz is the question mark. No one's worried about their defense. And there's McNamara, the best quarterback Iowa's had since probably Banks. And who's the other guy that's at San Francisco? I'll come up with it. But who you buying, who you selling, who you staying away from, who you intrigued by? I'm going to circle, I think Tennessee is a team that can at worst win 9. I think Texas A&M bounces back as well. And dare I say it, to get booed and hissed at, I think Iowa is going to be a lot better despite the offensive coordinator. than what they've been just because of who they've added. Offensive line's going to be good running game. McNamara is a playoff quarterback. They bring Allard from the tight end on top of what they already have at tight end. Iowa's going to be able to put up some points.
And most important factor, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly here, and I'm pretty sure it does, they brought in 3 transfer portal offensive linemen who are probably going to start for the Hawkeyes as well. I'm buying into the stock. I'm not saying Iowa is going to go be a world beater. They're going to be a top 10 team. Not saying that at all. They have enough talent to go win the West this year. And I'm also not saying they're going to put up 35 points a game on offense, but I think they have the talent to be a lot better than they were last year.
20.
They're not going to be a liability on offense this year.
And that's the thing. That's why I buy the hype on Iowa, because they only need 20. And think about how many games they won last year, despite the most anemic offense I have ever seen. They still end up going, 8-4?
7-5.
7-5, excuse me. Because Nebraska beat them last week. Yep. That's right. But think about that.
How do you forget that?
That was probably the worst offense I have seen since I was 10 years old. Since Nebraska in 2009.
That's not even a nice comp, but it kind of is what jogs the memory.
Oh, yeah. And that's what Iowa was last year. Great defense, anemic offense. I think their offense takes a step forward. I think their defense probably takes a step back, and that's okay because as Connor laid out, you're probably still going to be able to hold the other team to 20 points. Can your offense put up 20? I think Iowa's going to be able to do that with more success this year. I'm with you, Schmitty, but I know people are probably about ready to turn the radio off, so I'll flip over. A team that I think is due and I think has the talent to make a jump is Clemson. They have all the talent. You go back 3 years to the class of 2021, the guys that should be your starting juniors, redshirt sophomores this year. That was the number 5 class in the country, and I believe 4 of their top 5 guys in that class are in line for starting spots this year. I know how well Dabo develops. I know how tough of football teams Dabo creates. They have 2 great running backs in Phil Maffa and Will Shipley behind a pretty experienced offensive line with some high-level recruits on that offensive line. I think Clemson, despite the fact that their quarterback situation, we don't know all that much about Cade Klubnik, I still think Clemson's going to be fine offensively. They have talent all over. Their defense should be good. I think Clemson is going to surprise some people this year, and I don't think it should come as a surprise, but it will.
I think that is valid, and I'm in agreement with Iowa. I think Iowa takes a step forward. Cade McNamara, best quarterback since God knows. Yeah, so I think they take a step forward. I think A&M also bounces back. It's at least on paper, it's hard to see them do what they did again last year, right? So I think they take a step forward. USC probably finishes where they're expected to.
Top 10.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely going to be in the playoff mix. And a team that I always enjoy being good, and I don't know why, but I just think it's fun to watch, is Tennessee. And I hope they I don't know if they'll recreate what they did last year, but I still think that they'll be a solid team. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much in agreement with you guys, and I'm really curious to see what Iowa can do with 3 touchdowns a game. That'll be fun.
USC will be an interesting case study. I know we have to take a break here, so maybe we can get into USC after the break. USC, I am curious to see if they've learned any lessons from last year, because you need some physicality if you're going to come compete in the Big Ten in 2024.
They better make hay
and beat Utah
against their early schedule, because the way it rounds out, they've got to go to Notre Dame, then they host Utah right after Notre Dame. They host Washington. They're at Oregon. They host UCLA. That's a murderous finish for them. We'll wind down Hour 1 at Hail Varsity, presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time this hour, it's Hail Varsity Radio. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark. And we'll get to some of your comments in the stream here. You can watch the show, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Follow along with Hail Varsity Radio. Twitter at HVarsity Radio. Give us a follow at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence for Elijah Herbel. Connor Clark's Twitter is long but worth it at C_Clark_27. Podcast always there for you.
I hope it's worth it.
Spotify, iTunes, Google Play is where you can get the audio, the segments you want, or the entire show. Full show uploaded as well to the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. We were talking preseason hype versus hope. SC, Clemson, Tennessee, TCU, A&M, K-State, Iowa are 7 teams that there's a lot of folks don't know where to slot them. Do you put them top 10, top 5, top 25, top 15? And you have a lot of, well, they'll be ranked, they'll be good, but they're not going to be top 5, top 10. They're not a playoff contender. Of this list, I could see, just because of the conference, you really got Notre Dame and Florida State to deal with if you're Clemson. Florida State v. Clemson is going to be your de facto ACC championship game because Notre Dame doesn't have to play the conference title game. But that's folks are leaning more towards Florida State. USC's finish we just touched on, where it is UCLA and Oregon at home. You also get to host Utah, which is you're on the road at Utah, and Washington is a home game for you. You're at Oregon, and that's right after Notre Dame. So 5 of 6 to finish is a real stretch for USC to deal with.
Also be clear, USC is going to have to play one of those teams again in the conference title game as well.
Not long after just playing them. K-State's schedule is interesting. Their non-con is Missouri. So that's a throwback ode to the Big 8/Big 12. Not an easy game. They host Central Florida.
Are they on the road against Missouri?
I think that might be a neutral site Kansas City thing. I don't know that for sure. It's either in Columbia or in Arrowhead, I would think. Central Florida is at K-State. Central Florida with Gus is still good. They're still a 8-9 win program traditionally. We'll see how the Big 12 treats them. They're at Oklahoma State, who's trying to bounce back. The Mullet had a tough year last year. Houston and Dana Holgerson. I mean, Houston's a good program, really good program with a ton of athletes, and they're also at Texas this year.
And dare I say it, you're also at Kansas.
No,
when was the last time we said that as being a game to watch out for?
You absolutely say it.
I mean,
you have to now with the momentum that Kansas had. They actually filled up their stadium last year.
Quarterback comes back.
They need to put 12 games together, though. They did not put a second half of the year together. If you want me to confidently say that, but yes, Kansas is a much more legitimate game now. But that is, I mean, non-con included, that is a tough schedule for K-State. So that kind of changes my opinion on things, I think, a little bit.
Opinion on this: do you applaud or ask for a drug test? Vanderbilt football has received 5 first-place votes in the SEC preseason media poll. It has caught Feinbaum's attention. If you're one of these 5 voters, you're more than welcome to come on the show and explain your thought process. Why not, Vandy?
Revoke those media passes.
You've not been good since the Franklin or DiNardo era. Bill Doleman's on the way. Hour 2 coming up with Hail Varsity Radio.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back with you. It's Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Connor Clark, we welcome in the Pride of Fairbury. NBC Sports, the professor is all looking tanned and rested up. Bill Doleman back in office. Billy D, at Bill Doleman on Twitter. How the hell are you, sir?
Well, you know, I'm back in the office and getting ready to mold the next generation of sports journalists and unleash them upon the country.
I love it.
Well, you've already tried it, and we got Connor Clark out of it.
You got to do it again this next semester, too. So
we're talking about teams that may not live up to the hype or repeat last year. I'm buying stock in the Bill Doleman experience.
I was pretty impressed that I was just listening to Connor do the news while he was getting ready to start this next segment. I was pretty amazed at how that was operating. I didn't realize that he was doing the news and doing a walk and talk, which is, very advanced sports reporting.
I learned everything I know from Professor Bill. So.
Yeah. The red light means record. Bill, I want to start with this. A really cool trailer released as Memorial Stadium set to celebrate 100 years and gearing up for that celebration. Really awesome feature on 100 years in the Hail Varsity Yearbook from our friend Mike Babcock. but you've seen a lot of Nebraska football, not 100 years worth, but enough to probably have a top 3 moments at Memorial Stadium, either you witnessed or that's existed. Do you have a top 3? A top 3, good, bad, or ugly, at Memorial Stadium?
Boy, I'd probably have a top 30, and all would be tied for maybe number 1. But I will say this, and God rest his soul, my Uncle Art, I think I probably talked about it a few times back on the Average Joe Sports Show. My Uncle Art died at the age of, what was it, about 104, 105, somewhere in there. He saw Nebraska beat the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame at Memorial Stadium back in, what was that, 1924? 24. Something like that. And he'd had just a treasure trove of Husker memorabilia until, sadly, a fire took much of that out at a house that he had during his 105 years of life on Earth. But it was always fun when I was growing up to talk about ancient Husker history with him, and to think that he actually saw Nebraska beat the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame and Knute Rockne. So that was always kind of a great moment, I guess, for the family. You know, great moments. I kind of feel like the best moment for me was the first time I ever went to a Nebraska football game at Memorial Stadium, since we couldn't afford to go when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. I did find some tickets the other day to a game that I went to in the 1980s, and tickets were $12. So that takes you back a little ways. You know, I go back to that Colorado game of 1992 when Nebraska just destroyed Coy Detmer on Halloween night. The atmosphere was eerie. Fans were dressed up and liquored up, and 52-7 was the final score. I mean, that was a pretty spectacular day to be there. You know, in terms of poignancy, certainly after the 9/11 tragedy, and you know, Nebraska Rice was the first major event in the country. And the way the attention was focused on Nebraska that night, and the wonderful job that all of the people that Nebraska did to make it a great night for the country, really. Mm-hmm. And it was done so tastefully, which is certainly to be expected. And I also remember on I guess another side of it, when after the very difficult news of the Lawrence Phillips incident in 1995, mm-hmm. after what transpired the weekend before, when they had dominated Michigan State, and the bad news happens and Lawrence is arrested, and there's so much uncertainty around the program. But I just, this is more of an internal thing. I remember how that team together and rallied behind Coach Osborne, who was taking a lot of heat. And I believe it was Arizona State they played that next week, and just destroyed them. That was more of an internal team thing, and the way they responded that day, that kind of stands out too. But there are so many more. Kenny Walker. Yes, when Kenny Walker was introduced on Senior Day, what was that, 1987 or so? 1990. Sorry, and they had kept it somewhat of a secret. Well, really a secret for. And many people may not remember Kenny Walker. He was a deaf player who came to Nebraska out of Texas. They had introduced him to Mimi Mann, who was his interpreter. And she was Mimi Mann's wonderful. Sat in on all the coaches' meetings. Didn't know anything about football, but by the end of Kenny's career, probably knew more than anybody, and taught George Darlington a thing or two. And
be nice to George. He was with us this week.
I know. I heard the show. It was great to hear him. But for those folks who may not know, Kenny Walker played a couple different positions. Found a place on the defensive line. Deaf player, could not hear, had to rely on instinct and fast twitch muscle fibers, and became an All-American. But on his senior day, they had told Nebraska fans how to do the death clap and raising your hands and shaking them together. And Kenny emerged out of the tunnel to shake hands with Coach Osborne, and the crowd did that. And I remember seeing Kenny look up, and it was a rainy day, and just looking up and kind of amazed at that. And boy, you talk about a love affair between Nebraska football fans and football players. So that really certainly was it.
I was south end zone, front row, still frozen from that game, still heartbroken because of the fourth quarter. And I remember seeing that like in front of me, and then the footage, and it's made about every tunnel walk there is the Kenny Walker hugging Osborne, and then all the fans with the standing O for Kenny Walker and the applause, and then him signing "I love you," which was really, really, really cool. And then, backstory, players would do autograph sessions after they graduate. A lot of them were at the student union. My little brother, I think he was only 4 or 5 years old. Like, he went up to get Kenny's autograph at this autograph show, and Kenny put him on his lap, and it was just really, really cool. So Kenny's arguably one of my favorite Huskers ever. He's like top 2, but you nailed the moments between 9/11, Kenny Walker. For me, I've got Alex Henry, the 57-yarder, and I've got Roy going off against Missouri for 308, which was that was a hell of a. We've seen so many great backs at Nebraska over the years covering them, and then Roy just goes off. Off. What a great finish to Roy Halou's career.
Or the final drive against Northwestern, and not just the Westerkamp, the Kellogg to Westerkamp catch. Yeah. The Amir Abdullah play. What was that? A 4th down at 15?
Yeah, 4th and damn near 20.
4th and Holdridge is what we call it.
And that play gets lost in the dramatic final catch, but that's a Nebraska football play. They're doing everything you can to get that extra yard. And another favorite moments watching Nebraska fullbacks run free on a fullback trap over and over again about 3 times a year from Tom Rathman to Sam Schmidt to Mark Shaleen to Lance Lewis.
Stanley Havili, USC, fullback trap.
Andy Janovich against Wisconsin was a losing effort.
That was awesome. That gave him the lead.
That was a losing effort. I wasn't even at that game, and I swear I could hear Memorial Stadium from my house. That was a loud moment at Memorial Stadium whenever you give it to the first man through. But for juxtaposition's sake here, I want to turn it over to Connor Clark and ask Connor what his favorite Memorial Stadium memory is.
Oh, man. I mean, you can...
Sneaking in the fireball.
You can, you can... You can get in on this too, Bill, but I mean, obviously I don't have as many memories, especially in person, as the three of you do.
Hasn't been many in recent years is kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I would say on TV, like, growing up, I think one of the cooler moments I've ever seen was the Fultz tribute. That was really, like, 90,000 is one type thing. That was really, really cool. But honestly, I think my favorite, like, moment so far while being there is either the Northwestern game, because it was just a pounding in 2021, or when I forget who intercepted it, but the McNamara interception late in the game against Michigan. I know they ended up losing, but that is by far and away the best football atmosphere I have ever been in.
Williams.
Yeah, the 2021 Michigan game. Absolutely electrifying atmosphere, something I had never seen in my life before, and that was one of the coolest things I think I've ever been a part of. Again, we lost, but, man, that was really, really awesome.
And that's kind of what I was getting at, is that 2 of our 3 favorite memories combined, Connor, that we just listed were in losing efforts.
Yeah.
Yeah, why are we bringing up losing? Okay, when Keith Jackson made the catch in 1986 right in front of me, and I should have made the tackle.
One for the
or I should have, interfered.
Tackle.
Right in front of me, makes that. It was like on a 4th down at 13 or something, and there, Nebraska outplayed him the whole game. How
do you?
That was in a losing effort.
It's 10 points in 90 seconds, and I could see McBride going House of Cards on you and throwing you out in front of the train.
Yeah, I mean, I should have. There are such great moments. The John Root hit on Kelly Phelps, is blasting him in 1978 is another one that.
That's on the all-time highlight reel, though, of like Tunnel Walk, because it's a tribute to the history. And, with Rude killing Phelps, our old buddy El Kent was on the sideline for that, and he's like, he can still hear Phelps screaming.
That's a bigger play than, Governor Pillen recovering Billy Sims' fumble, later on that drive.
They called him down, and Osborne probably... I mean, there's footage of him on the sideline. He never lost his mind, and he was on his knees slamming the turf.
Yeah.
Going more than dadgummit. Well, it's fun to look and reminisce a little bit. Bill, Media Days next week. Nebraska will be front and center on Thursday in Indy. I want to get your take here on the Pac-12 because they're in the midst of, trying to say remain calm. All is well.
Doors?
What now?
They're in the midst of closing their doors.
Well, I'm saying, somebody has locked the outside door so nobody can leave the room. But they're just a mess right now. With that, SEC had their media days, and Lane Kiffin went off on NIL. Lane didn't get much sleep the night before getting on the old private jet, it didn't look like. And then there's Saban, poised to rebound and reload because, he's being doubted. His legacy is in jeopardy, per some in the SEC country.
These media days are something, and it's always interesting who stands out, who says what, who becomes the focal point. Obviously, in the SEC, Lane Kiffin, either for the way he was dressed or for what he said, is the talked about darling of the SEC and gave people something to talk about. Because, look, Nick Saban is going to say what Nick Saban wants to say. They didn't have near remember a year ago it was Saban and the dude at A&M that got into
Saban
it.
And Jimbo.
Yeah, Jimbo. They got into it. That provided fodder for a while. This year it doesn't seem as though they were playing, and they didn't want to play their cards this year, so they left it up to Kiffin. On the other side of the country, I don't know what's going to come out of the Pac-12. I understand Deion Sanders wasn't going to speak or something, but I don't know how they can actually have conversations about what the season's going to be like. When it's not dark clouds over their head, it is just flat out freaking raining and storming.
Hurricane,
right? And they don't have an umbrella. So hey, what's the season going to be like? How's that new offense and the new defense? It doesn't matter because nobody knows what the future of the Pac-12 is going to be. And I was thinking about this, and I was talking to somebody the other day. Oregon and Washington are notably quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Everything with the Pac-12 has been centered around SMU, San Diego State, Boise State, and all these other schools, with all the speculation about the survival of the conference. And you don't hear much at all from Washington and Oregon, who right now you would think are these standard bearers for the league. And they're not saying, look, we need to know. We got to know what's going on here, or we are going to. I don't understand. So, do they know something? Do they have an ace? They're not going to have any aces. Do they have a nine in the pocket, a pair of nines that might land them someplace better? I just find it interesting. Washington State and Oregon State have no power. Cal and Stanford would like for all of sports to go away, right? But Washington and Oregon are not saying, look, we really need to know for the future of what we have tried to build to become elite programs in all areas of sports. Not just our football programs are good. Oregon's got good programs, Washington, but they're notably quiet and not saying, look, we need to know. I'm not sure Utah has the power, even though it's been a good program, to say we need to know. But where's Washington and Oregon saying we deserve a right to know what the future of our programs are going to be, or we're going to have to search and beg elsewhere? But I just find that odd that you don't hear anything about them.
Yeah, it's all too quiet, as they say. Bill will holler next week. We'll be back from Indy, and I'll tell you all about the shrimp cocktail sauce and how much it burns.
I'm not big on that either. Just go find yourself a nice steak.
Spicy.
You've done the cocktail sauce once. It's over. Go do something. Go get a good burger or steak someplace.
Oh, I will. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Talk to you next week,
boys.
dude.
All right, Connor, we'll talk.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Big thanks to Bill Doleman. Get to download the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or the video portion, Hail Varsity YouTube or Twitter at HVarsity Radio. Brady Oltmans with us from HailVarsity.com and magazine. Brady's been all over Husker coverage, HailVarsity.com, where you log on and read his work. Do so at Brady Oltmans on Twitter, where you need to follow him. Brady, good to see you. You're locked in. I know you got your USA gear ready for World Cup tonight. I know Archie is Is Archie going with you to watch World Cup this evening?
No.
Does he know this yet?
I mean, that's not a bad idea if I want to get some free drinks tonight. I'm sure that could win over the favor of a couple of people, but we'll keep the scene low, at least for the group stages.
I like it. So you've done quite a few previews this week and leading up to fall camp with wideouts and, of course, the quarterbacks and running backs. I want to start, though, with a feature you did a little bit ago, and that's the NIL, with that being on many people's minds as media days continue to churn through. And you have the U.S. Senate this week had a draft introduced. There's some trepidation with putting it into the hands of folks in Washington. Totally get that. I also know that Tommy Tuberville, whatever you think of him, knows college football. Joe Manchin's best friend is Nick Saban, so I'm sure there's some input there. So your take here, man, as you look at the Congress and Senate likely getting involved to set some ground rules for NIL. Needed, good thing, or uh-oh. It's one thing to have the Wild West. It's another thing for folks in the swamp to get a hold of it.
Well, it's something that schools have been pleading for. Schools in a collective want needed the NCAA to get Washington involved. Ever since the state legislature started passing their own NIL bills and everything, it became everybody playing their own little game, which is, I guess, fine for, in-state kids and fine for high school ball. But when you're talking about a Big Ten conference involving 14 schools across 10 states playing by 10 different rules, it just doesn't fly. So they really needed some sort of federal legislation. Enter new NCAA president Charlie Baker, a politician by trade, a former governor of Massachusetts, doing a lot of politicking. I guess it would have been June, still, I guess, July-ish, when he went up on lobbying Capitol Hill and everyone. And then you kind of see the first draft bill introduced yesterday. I believe Ted Cruz is the one that he co-authored, was introduced this morning, just kind of laying out fine points of things that the NCAA wanted to get. Now, having said that, none of these are the first NIL-related legislative figures addressed in Washington. There have been different bills, different drafts brought forward, and none of them really got anywhere. And then now you consider that this is introduced just before the legislative break. They basically take all of August off and then regroup in September. Not to mention, by the time they come back, it is very close to an election cycle, historically, when Washington kind of slows to a crawl. So if anybody's looking at this and thinking like, oh, big change is coming, I would recommend slowing your brakes a little bit, because it's just not going to work that fast. And let's all be honest, we've all dealt with bureaucracy in the past. Things don't move that fast. So it's something that the schools and administrators have been pushing for. But if it's really going to lead to direct, change, if these drafts and these bills are going to lead to direct change, I tend to doubt, at least at this moment.
Yeah, Brady, I was going to go there, but you kind of laid it out. I was just thinking, man, without getting too political, if you want something to be changed and changed quickly, I think the federal government might be the last place you want to go to, and that's as political as I'll get on this show here today. But that was kind of my reaction. You kind of got into that just now. So I just want to get your thoughts on how necessary this actually is, because you've seen some coaches, even within the past week, Lane Kiffin getting up and calling it essentially NFL free agency without a salary cap, the new transfer portal and NIL regulations. And on one hand, that's true. But on the other hand, I look at Nebraska and I say, well, could be a big advantage to Nebraska having an NFL with no salary cap. Nebraska's got more resources than a lot of other schools out there.
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska's certainly well situated, and you listen to Jonathan Bateman, the assistant AD with NIL governance and strategy compliance things now. He talked about this recently. He kind of said, they're always forward thinking. They're always kind of gauging where everything is at. And, famously, Nebraska athletics budget is operating debt free. So in theory, they would be a lot better off, if somebody called them employees, not athletes. If it just hypothetically speaking that happened, Nebraska, by operating debt free, would be in a better position than some places to do that. Now, again, that's completely hypothetical. Everybody else, or all of the bills introduced and drafts introduced in Washington, are all stipulate that the college athlete would not be employees. They would be students, and they would get that in federal law should any of them even remotely get as far as going through. So it's a whole thing. But obviously Nebraska, like you said, is on the forefront and looking at all options ahead as things kind of move forward.
Brady Oltmans is with us on Hail Varsity Radio. When you talk about the transfer side of things, rather more so than the NIL side of things, you mentioned it's like NFL free agency every year, but it's also like everybody signing a one-year contract every year. How do you go about fixing that? The one-time transfer rule has definitely been in the conversation, bringing that back maybe. What's your opinion on that, and how would you go about, I guess, fixing that in college football?
Well, it comes back to, I think, among the many things that people looked at Deion's situation out of Colorado was, when he very publicly walked in and said, I'm bringing my bags with me and it's Louis. So into that portal, effectively kind of firing kids, which has kind of been the big draw that a lot of these schools and coaches have pointed to and said, we don't fire kids, because as soon as you are able to get rid of them for a lack of performance, they effectively are employees. That's one big argumentative hurdle that from professors, law, economics people, everybody I talk to, that is one big thing that people will point to and said, well, you can't fire them for a lack of performance. So that's unlike in the NFL, as a big designator for employees. That's essentially where you're at with the kind of one-year contract thing. It seems to make sense, but once you get into that, well, they can ask me to not come back kind of thing, even if it's, right now, somewhat you could see that, but it happens with coaching shuffles and coaching carousel things. So it's all kind of fluid from that respect. But that's one thing that kind of stands out with the 1 year agreements and transfer portal issues is, it teeters. You got to be really careful with it, because then at some point they do become, from a legal standpoint, close to being employees. And let's all be honest here, that's something the NCAA wants to get as far away from as possible.
Brady Oltmans with us, Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency at Brady Oltmans on Twitter with HailVarsity.com and magazine. Brady, going to go shift to recruiting. You have a really good story up on some names to watch, potential flips this fall. Nebraska, just because a kid is committed, won't stand pat. They'll keep it in the mix, you would think, with some guys that were on their board. A couple of kids from Texas, more than a couple, but you have Dante Carter, Caleb Mitchell, and William Nettles. Also, one of our favorites, Gage Ginther, committed to Tennessee, and then Teddy Rizak from Westside, stud ball player. He's at Notre Dame. Do you feel like Nebraska is still in at least the friend zone to be able to stay in a conversation despite a commitment?
Well, I think one benefit for this coaching staff is their ability to build relationships and to keep those bridges open and those open lines of communication there. Now, if it's obviously up to the kid if they're willing to rethink their commitment, but I think at a certain point, the factor of Nebraska not winning recently comes into people's minds when they make a college decision. For some, it's less of a factor. For others, it's a big factor. And all those kids you mentioned and all those kids I wrote about are ones that, not to say that the wins and losses become the crux of their decision, but should Nebraska prove that they're going to become a winner right away, and should Rule have tangible evidence and proof of concept where this program's headed, it might make some of these kids rethink their decision in the fall here. And all of them, I believe, have said positive things about Matt Rule and his staff and their visits to Nebraska. A couple of them made multiple visits to Nebraska. So you'd think that, when things are rolling good and the sea of red is roaring, some September, October, even into November evening, we all know here that makes for a pretty convincing sell for an 18, 17-year-old kid. And I think that that's kind of what Nebraska's hoping for. And Rule has said kind of publicly that they hope to field a competitive team, or team competitive enough to maybe put them over the finish line on somebody, even if they're committed or not. So it's going to make for a really interesting fall season, even from the 2024 standpoint.
Brady, maintaining those relationships, how important is that going to be in the recruitment of Gatlin Bear? He set her a commitment date. The wins from the outside looking in haven't seemed like they've been shifting towards Nebraska. Michigan and Boise seem to be two schools he's really high on, but he's not a guy that's going to be playing college football for a couple of years, going off and doing a mission. How important is it going to be that Nebraska maintains a relationship there?
I think it's incredibly important, especially you think about Garrett McGuire and the relationships he's built and the recruiting wins he's already compiled at Nebraska. I mean, look at his receiver room, not only from the high school recruiting standpoint, but the staff knew, like even Jalen Lloyd, they told Jalen Lloyd who the wide receiver coach was going to be, and they talked, and, Jalen committed back in December and Garrett was introduced back in January, shortly after the NFL season came to a close. He's got a really good ability to relate to kids and show the finer points of, relationship building and also coaching and detail work. And I think that's going to stand out for people. Now, obviously, the mission is a little bit different. You really don't get to stay in communication much with other people. I think you get a couple of video calls with your family a couple times a year for Mother's Day, Christmas, things like that. But you're really kind of isolated. So it behooves oneself to keep in contact with the family, with their high school coach, do as much as you can to keep those lines of communication up. So it's interesting. It's definitely a wrinkle, but anytime that you're able to keep a relationship out there, it certainly helps for Nebraska.
Brady, I'm going to keep you on the other side for just a couple of minutes. We got to talk O-line recruitment, get your thoughts on a couple of names that Nebraska fans have been following. Can you give us a couple minutes on the other side?
Oh, you betcha. Guys.
All right, there he is, Brady Oltmans, HailVarsity.com and magazine. Great stuff on recruiting, on NIL, and, of course, where things are at with Nebraska on some kids they will maybe try and flip for 2024 as you get closer to that early signing day. Danny Burke also coming up from VSiN Sports Network. We'll check in with Danny in a moment, but Brady continues on at Hail Varsity, presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Couple minutes of overtime here with Brady Oltmans. Hail Varsity Radio continues, presented by Currency. Catch the show on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel or the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio, and follow Brady on Twitter at Brady Oltmans. Brady, offensive tackle, a position of importance for all football, but Nebraska in the race for Grant Brix and Brandon Baker. Baker, the number one offensive tackle in the country. You have Brix in at number 11. What's the latest you're hearing, either on timeline or how's the wind blowing? Is K-State back in the lead for Brix, and any lean for Baker? What are you hearing?
Brix is an interesting one because he definitely could take until the season, but I don't know. I just, from kind of, licking the tip of the finger, putting the finger up and seeing where the winds are blowing, I just think we might hear something before August 1st. It just seems like there might be a little bit of momentum brewing in his recruitment. And I think K-State's in good standing, but I think Nebraska's in a strong position for him. I just think that there's certainly a lot of momentum around the program, things that he's seen on his visits that stand out about Nebraska and its future in the times that he'd be on campus. Baker's a lot more interesting. I can't get a fix on his timeline. I know he's a high profile enough guy, and he wants his decision will come in season. I know he's talked about it's not set in stone, but he wants to take an official to Nebraska. He's got a bye week at Mater D about the same week that I think it's that September 16th, that Nebraska home opener weekend. So it sounds like they're going to try to make that work for an official visit to Nebraska on that home opener week, but it's not locked in yet, not official, but he has said that should line up pretty good for him. And at that point, you get him in on that opening weekend, that's going to make quite the impression. I mean, he's liked his first couple visits to Lincoln. I think it stands out for him. There's a reason why Nebraska is standing toe-to-toe with, Oregon and these big time still, 10-win programs. And I think that him seeing and experiencing a game day at Nebraska could definitely set the Huskers apart there. But as far as where Nebraska's at in that lineup, it's still, we're talking 2 months away, and that could be a lifetime in college football.
Nebraska has done a great job of recruiting linemen they like for 2024. But if you can close on Do you think they take both? Last question. Do you think they take both?
Absolutely. I think that would be a bow on everything and kind of really legitimize what Donovan Raiola is building in terms of the future. I mean, say what you will about the guy, but he's recruited like a madman here, and this coaching staff sure believes in him and have the infrastructure built for that offensive line to succeed. And the guys they got in the building right now believe in him and want to play for him. So there's something to be said for that kind of enthusiasm around the offensive line.
Brady, it's all about Team USA tonight. Enjoy your soccer. Give Archie a treat, and we'll check in this weekend, bud.
You got it, boys.
There he is. Thanks. Brady Oltmans loves him some soccer and
football.
Football. A guy that, has been dodging all sorts of things because it's been bachelor party weekend left and right, and it's like he's a goalie trying to react. Danny Burke with us from VSiN Sports Network. Prior to Chicago, it's been like 2 months. How are you, or do you need bail?
Hanging in there strong in terms of not needing bail, but, we still got a little bit of time the rest of the summer, so I may be needing to call you guys on a random weeknight sometime soon. But no, man, it's been good, and yeah, it's been a minute, so happy to be back on with you.
Well, he needs money not for bail because he lost all his money on the Cubs.
I don't think he would do that.
Well, the Cubs are inevitably disappointing us, and yet the ticket prices are lowering, so we're not getting anything good out of it. That's the disappointment here in the Windy City, guys.
Danny, do you have a play? What have you been analyzing with VSiN for tonight or this weekend on the Diamond?
Yeah, I didn't play anything officially tonight. I was waiting to see if this line was going to move down, and granted, maybe it did out of state in some other jurisdictions, but the one game I was looking at was this Texas Rangers-Los Angeles Dodgers matchup. Tony Gonsolin taking the bump against Andrew Haney, and look, you look at Tony Gonsolin's ERA, and you think, all right, he's been solid. He's 3.72 on his ERA, 1.09 on his WHIP, 5-3 record, not too shabby. But when you look deeper into the underlying analytics, the xFIP, that is indicating that at some point this guy is due to regress. And he has had some tough outings. I don't know, maybe the last 4 out of 5. His last one was good against the Mets, but before that, he had been getting beaten up a little bit. And Texas has had one of, if not the hottest offenses in Major League Baseball, and that has still persisted over the second half of the season, even though it's only been about a week and a half or so. They're still mauling righties. So I was looking at either a team total for the Rangers over 4.5 at -120, or even a full game total over 9.5. The issue, like I was saying, waiting for a better number, I wanted to get the flat 9, and I wouldn't have minded laying -120 to do so because Haney himself isn't really that strong of a pitcher, and some of the Dodgers batters, Muncy, Betts, they have had pretty good history against him. So I think there could be a lot of runs there between Texas and Los Angeles, and that was really the only game I was targeting. I have a small lean toward the Rangers money line if you're more interested in that, but like I'm saying, I would look at Rangers team total or the full game total going over, but I didn't get the number I wanted, so I'll probably stay away, perhaps look for an in-game approach if it starts out lower scoring, and then look to get a better number throughout the middle of this event between those two squads.
Danny, in World Cup action tonight, the U.S. women take on the Vietnamese women, and the line in this one is currently set at, I believe, 6 goals, which is a huge line if people out there don't follow football or soccer, whatever you want to call it. Do I touch that with the 10-foot pole, Danny? 6 goals is a lot, but also I know the U.S. is probably the best team in the world.
I think your best bet in what I did the last go-around was just to bet them in the futures market just to win the World Cup because, I don't know, I think I even got them at like plus 175 when they did it, but still you're like, well, there's really no one that's better than them necessarily. It's not going to be the biggest payout, but hey, if you have an advantage, they're giving you plus money, you might as well take a stab at it. So I think you're better off looking at the long run with the team versus a game-to-game basis, especially when you're laying 6 goals. That just seems like misery to have to sweat out a soccer game and lay 6. I couldn't even imagine that.
Danny, real quick here, I got to ask, your favorite in the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes, if he does end up leaving this year, who's your favorite to land him, and what are the odds on that?
All right, you guys can call me crazy here, but I was golfing the other day, and the guy that I was golfing with said he is friends with Ohtani's agent, and I'm just repeating what he said. This is all he said, and I asked him, I confirmed about kind of some of his background info and how he knew him, and it checked out to a certain degree, right? But take it as you will. He said there's a better than 50% chance that he goes to the Cubs and that they may have one of the best packages to offer him, about 13 years, over $600 million, and he can retire early and still get all that money by being an ambassador. I said, is it because of the Seiya Suzuki connection? He said, no, it's because of you, Darvish, actually. He talked up Chicago very well, the city, the organization. So all I'm saying is apparently the Cubs may have one of the better packages, and nobody's really talking about Chicago. They didn't spend big on free agents, so maybe this is the one Rick is finally going to do.
Danny, you can't do this to me. You're going to get my hopes way too high now.
I'm just, hey, just keep them up, baby. We're used to getting disappointed, so you might as well get excited for something. They ain't making a postseason, so let's hitch our wagon onto this.
Danny Burke, the prophet and pride of Chicago.
What a scoop that is.
At Danny Burke 5, you'll find him on VSiN Live, and of course, Bet on Chicago. Check that out weekends as well. Danny, enjoy your weekend. You made a Cubs fan smile today.
That's what we love to hear. Appreciate it, fellas. Take care.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Our favorite Coloradoan, Vic, has emailed in, Chris at hailvarsity.com. A good show, good week. Been listening live. Usually I'm on Spotify, a day behind. Look forward to seeing the show tomorrow at 8 a.m. So he thinks we're gonna crawl to the studio / home studio at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So Vic's taking the over. And apparently he thinks it's going to be you and Cranack beating me to being the third man on the broadcast for the weekend edition tomorrow, 7:45 a.m. Central on the Hail Varsity YouTube stream and Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed.
You can book it. I'll put on a steak and a beer on this. I will not arrive to the studio later than 7:40.
Okay.
Book it.
Are you sleeping here?
No, I'll be all right.
I don't know if I believe that after last weekend.
I still made it here by 7:40 last weekend. I just didn't get my coffee.
Like, dude, I gotta take some coffee home. So I have some in the morning. Because I didn't do show with coffee last weekend either. But big thanks to Bill Doleman, Brady Oltmans this hour, Danny Burke with VSiN, and Jacob Padilla. Reminder to get buckled up, hands on the wheel, eyes in mind. Straight ahead, the driver has one job. That's to drive a message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. A little nugget from VSiN's Danny Burke. He says Shohei to the Cubs. Connor Clark's calling BS on that.
It's just so
not on Danny, but you don't want to get your hopes up.
Yeah, I mean that is like a Cubs fan's wildest dream right now. And I mean when you think of Shohei too, yeah, he's probably going to be the most expensive player, like maybe in sports, period. Because you're signing
2 spots.
Because you're signing an ace pitcher and you're signing who's a guy who's going to be your best hitter in the lineup.
Day in, day out DH.
I just it's so out there, and I know like when it was first getting talked up that he was going to leave or get traded, that he's friends with Seiya and he's talked to you, Darvish, about the Cubs and whatnot. And I know that was getting talked up at the beginning stages, but I just don't know. That seems... I hope it happens. It seems far-fetched. Danny, you're going to make me lose sleep over this because I'm going to be too excited now, but hey, it is what it is.
It just sounds like a classic theory that a Cubs fan would cook up. That, Shohei's coming. The Cubs have a better offer than anyone's actually saying. 12 years, $600 million the Cubs can do. It just seems so classic Cubs fan, and that's not a slight. That just seems very typical.
It's so opposite of what they've done, though, because they've been scared to spend money. I mean... Dansby's been the biggest contract that they've spent on in quite some time now.
That's what I'm saying. That seems like something a Cubs fan would cook up and be like, nah, this is what's happening behind the scenes, whenever reality would tell you that that's probably not what the Cubs would actually do.
Look, I don't know. I bet you he goes to somewhere that's warm in free agency unless somebody really wants him as a rental this year, and we'll see how it pans out. It's going to be fascinating, though.
Well, the thing is the warm weather might not matter because Shohei goes home to Japan every single winter anyway.
That's true.
Might not matter. You're just living in Chicago in the summertime. In the wind, it keeps you nice and cool.
Yeah, but opening day in March, that's frigid.
That is true.
Yep, get on that Oprah loop, right? Is that what it is, the Oprah loop?
The loop, yeah.
The Lakeshore loop.
Lakeshore Drive.
Right, but I'm saying when, it's right on the edge of...
Grant Park and
yeah, I mean,
Field.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really awesome. It's cool.
It's good in July, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
March, not so much.
Just blow it away. Talk to you in the morning, and be sure to get the show downloaded today or whatever you want to catch during the week. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play for Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark, Chris Schmidt. Talk to you tomorrow morning, weekend edition with Hail Varsity, presented by Currency.
Nice job not putting in a time.